When people hear about Noah's Ark, most of them immediately picture a giant boat packed with animals, all peeking out of little windows just like those cute illustrations we see in children's books. But what if I told you that behind this familiar story lies an ancient naval engineering project so sophisticated that it still sparks debate among scholars today? And more than that, techniques for logistics, ventilation, and waste management that sound like something out of a modern survival manual for life at sea. Few people actually stop to think about how the Ark functioned on the inside. How did so many animals survive in there for so long? Where did the drinking water come from? What do they do with all the waste? How did they manage to provide enough food and space for everyone? It's no exaggeration to say that the biblical account offers details that, when looked at closely, reveal practical, intelligent, and even brilliant solutions. More than just a simple boat, Noah's Ark seems to have been a true laboratory of logistics and organization under extreme conditions. And that's exactly what we're going to explore together right now. Get ready to discover what may have really happened inside that massive vessel during the dark days of the flood. What you're about to learn could change the way you see this story forever. And hey race, the most fascinating part, some of these survival strategies are still being used today for resource management and storage in challenging environments. So let's begin this journey. Picture a colossal ship built thousands of years before the era of modern engineering, yet with proportions that still impress naval stability experts to this day. The Ark of Noah, as described in Scripture, was not just any old boat. Its biblical dimensions, carefully recorded, ensured exceptional balance, even in the middle of the fiercest storms. It was 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. A solid structure designed not for speed, but for endurance. Interestingly, these same proportions are used in modern cargo ships, known for their remarkable stability in open waters. The rectangular shape, far from being a mistake, actually helped maximize flotation and resistance against violent waves. It's as if the design was calculated for one clear purpose: to preserve life safely amid the chaos of the flood. No sails, no rudders, just stability. The mission was survival, not navigation. Now think about this for a moment. How could Noah have gotten these measurements so right without the technical knowledge we have today? Many scholars believe there was indeed divine assistance, Volveda, kind of inspiration coming from something far greater. And this makes us reflect on the level of care behind this rescue plan. Every detail of this ancient naval engineering project, from the size to the shape, seems perfectly designed to withstand the impossible. And hey race, another fact that might surprise you: the same proportional concept is used in the construction of modern offshore oil platforms, designed to resist the power of the sea. So, what we read in the biblical account is not just a story, it's pure survival strategy. In many ways, Noah's Ark was a floating fortress, built to withstand not just the force of the water, but also time itself. And this is just the beginning of what we're going to uncover about the inner workings of this remarkable vessel. Now, stop and think about the scale of the mission Noah was given. There were no electric tools, no cranes, not even motorized saws. Just manual labor, determination, and a whole lot of faith. For 120 years, that's right. Over a century, Noah and his 3 sons dedicated themselves to building the Arkansas. It's hard to even imagine this level of effort today in a world we're used to pressing buttons to get things done. The choice of materials is also worth noting. Go for wood. To this day, there's debate over what exactly this wood was, but many traditions suggest it was a type of cypress or a similar tree, known for its high resistance to water and marine decay. And this was no random choice. For a vessel that needed to endure months of storms without maintenance, durability wasn't just important, it was a matter of life and death. This shows a remarkable level of technical care, even without modern technology. Now, try to picture the scene: this colossal structure, built piece by piece, each plank carefully fitted together, sealed with pitch to ensure it was watertight. The sound of hammering, the creaking of wood, the dust in the air, and all of it done by a single family. No workers, no team of civil engineers or designers. Just faith, courage, and, without a doubt, an extraordinary level of organization. A true masterclass in perseverance and teamwork. And if you've ever been through a home renovation, you know just how stressful that process can be, right? Now multiply that experience by 1,000. It's almost impossible not to believe that this undertaking had some kind of higher guidance. After all, building a vessel of these proportions, with ancient naval engineering techniques, and without the resources we have today, would be nearly impossible without divine assistance. And this was just the beginning of Noah's journey. One of the biggest questions people ask about Noah's Ark has always been, how could so many animals possibly fit inside? Most people imagine millions of species cramped into a limited space, but the biblical account speaks of kinds of animals, not all the individual species we know today. And that changes everything. Instead of every species, it would have been broader categories like one pair for all felines, another for all canines. This understanding drastically reduces the number of animals needed to preserve biodiversity. Researchers estimate that, considering these biblical kinds, about 100 basic groups of animals would have needed to be brought on board. That would total approximately 6,800 individuals, which is still a massive challenge, but nowhere near the idea of millions. And hay race, where the genius of the plan really stands out the selection of juvenile or subadult specimens. Younger animals take up less space, eat less food, and produce less waste. A simple yet incredibly effective solution. This choice to bring young animals wasn't just about logistics, it also makes perfect sense when you think about longevity and the ability to reproduce after the flood. A young pair would have many years ahead of them to generate offspring and repopulate the earth. It's almost like planning a survival colony with a focus on long-term success and reproductive potential. Pure strategy and what today would be considered responsible animal management. In that sense, the Ark functioned almost like a biological reserve, carefully designed to ensure the continuation of life. And hay race, another interesting fact, this idea of selecting young pairs is still used today in conservation and breeding programs. What many see as just a symbolic story actually presents a practical example of logistics and confinement management. Far from being a fantastical tale about millions of animals squeezed into a boat, the biblical account reveals a viable, well-calculated, and surprisingly well-organized plan. Which brings us to another crucial question: how did they manage to feed and care for all those animals during such a long period of confinement? Let's be honest, there's no point in having a well-organized space for the animals if there isn't an efficient system to feed them all, right? The logistics of feeding the animals aboard Noah's Ark is one of the key aspects that shows how advanced this project may have been. One of the most probable solutions would have been the use of ceramic containers to store grains and dry feed. After all, ceramic helps protect food from moisture and pests, ensuring that it lasts for extended periods. And it doesn't stop there. Food preservation through solar dehydration was already known by many ancient cultures, and it could easily have been used on the Arkansas. Grains, roots, fruits, and even some herbs could be dried under the sun, drastically reducing the risk of spoilage while making storage much easier. Plus, dehydration significantly reduces both the volume and weight of the food supply, a huge advantage when space is limited. Simple, effective, and smart. Now, let's look at the other side of the equation: waste management. With thousands of animals confined in one space, the buildup of feces and urine could have turned the Ark into a literal health disaster. But the biblical account gives us clues about a well-thought-out structure. Many scholars believe the Ark may have included sloped floors and drainage channels to direct waste into specific holding areas. This would allow the removal, even the recycling of waste, as fertilizer for plants being grown to feed the animals themselves. This concept of gravity-based drainage, with no need for pumps or complicated mechanisms, is yet another example of how practical and sustainable the Ark's design might have been. Similar systems are still used today in barns, aviaries, and even some farms. It shows that even without modern technology, there was a clear awareness of hygiene and animal well-being. And this attention to the internal environment doesn't stop there, it also applies to the water supply, which brings us to the next key point. Besides food, another absolutely critical factor for survival inside Noah's Ark was access to clean drinking water. And let's be honest, with all that rain pouring down outside, it would have been a huge waste not to take advantage of such a natural resource, right? Rainwater harvesting seems like one of the most logical and feasible strategies to ensure a steady supply of fresh water. The Ark's roof could easily have been designed to channel rain into large internal reservoirs, collecting every drop that fell from the sky. But of course, drinking untreated rainwater, especially in an enclosed space filled with so many animals, would be asking for trouble. And this is where sand and charcoal filtration comes into play. This method, though simple, is extremely effective and is still used today in many home purification systems. As the water passes through layers of fine sand, stones, and activated charcoal, impurities are removed, making the water safe to drink. It's a practical, efficient, and sustainable hydraulic system. Now imagine the distribution of that water inside the Arkansas. With multiple levels and compartments, there would need to be a practical way to get water to each area where the animals were kept. The most accepted theory suggests the use of bamboo tubes, lightweight, strong, and naturally hollow, making them perfect for channeling water. Bamboo was also a readily available material at the time, making this solution highly plausible within the context of ancient naval engineering. If you're familiar with permaculture, this kind of water harvesting and distribution system might sound familiar. It's very similar to the techniques still used in sustainable living projects today. In this sense, Noah's Ark may have been one of the earliest examples of self-sufficient design long before sustainability became a popular term. But keeping the air breathable inside the Ark was another critical challenge. And that's exactly what we're going to look at next. Have you ever spent time in a closed room with no windows and poor air circulation? It doesn't take long before the space feels stuffy, heavy, almost unbearable, right? Now multiply that by thousands of animals, all breathing the same air day after day. Ventilation on Noah's Ark wasn't just a minor detail, it was a matter of survival. With no electricity, no fans, the only option was to rely on intelligence and the laws of physics. The solution? A passive ventilation system based on natural convection currents. Here's how it works. Hot air, being lighter, rises while cool air sinks. The Ark likely had a large opening along the top of the roof, plus vertical ducts that allowed the hot air to escape while drawing in fresh air from below. A simple yet incredibly effective concept, one that is still used today in eco-friendly buildings. And here's another fascinating fact: this same principle is applied in modern sustainable architecture, greenhouses, barns, and even in some energy-efficient homes. In the case of the Ark, this passive ventilation would have ensured constant air renewal, reducing the buildup of toxic gases like ammonia, which is released from animal waste. It also would have helped control humidity levels, preventing mold and protecting both the animals and the stored food. This system once again highlights the level of planning that went into the Ark's design. It's hard to imagine Noah and his family enduring months in an unbearable, unhealthy environment. Ventilation was a key element in making life inside the Ark possible. But of course, survival wasn't just about caring for the body. Mental health was equally important during such extreme confinement. And that's what we're going to explore in the next section. Being confined for just a week is already difficult. Now imagine spending 370 days inside a vessel, with no possibility of going outside, surrounded by noisy animals and the constant sound of water slapping against the hull. Under these conditions, mental health became just as vital as physical survival. That's why it's very likely that Noah's Ark included acoustic solutions to reduce stress, isolated compartments, thick wooden walls, and perhaps even spaces padded with straw or fabrics to muffle the noise. This concern about noise control wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity. Excessive noise generates anxiety, irritability, and even aggression in both humans and animals. Having quiet areas where the family could rest or pray would have been essential for emotional balance. After all, their confinement wasn't only physical. It required psychological strength to endure isolation, monotony, and the uncertainty of what the next day would bring. Another key factor in this context was maintaining a routine. It may sound simple, but setting schedules for feeding, cleaning, maintenance, and prayer would have provided a sense of order in the middle of chaos. A clear division of responsibilities between Noah, his sons, and their wives would help keep everyone focused on practical tasks, preventing the emotional wear and tear that boredom and inactivity can cause. In situations of prolonged confinement, routine becomes a survival strategy. If you pay attention, this idea of daily cycles and structured activities is still used today in places like space missions, submarines, and Antarctic research stations. Psychologists know that well-defined routines help maintain mental stability in extreme environments. In this sense, Noah's Ark was not just a physical shelter, it was also a space for emotional preservation. And that leads us directly to the next important topic: what happened to the animals and biodiversity after the flood. One of the great mysteries for anyone studying the story of Noah's Ark is the question of biodiversity. How could such a relatively small number of animals lead to the immense variety of species we see on Earth today? The most widely accepted explanation in this context is post-flood speciation. This means that from a few ancestral pairs, different variations emerged over generations, adapting to new environments and conditions. This is something we still see happening in nature today, and it is well documented in modern biology. Want a practical example? Look at dogs. All domestic dog breeds from Chihuahuas to German Shepherds descend from a single ancestral species, the gray wolf. The diversity of breeds didn't come from millions of separate types, but from genetic variation over time. The same principle would apply to the animals on the Arkansas. The biblical kinds would serve as genetic matrices for the multiplication of species. This reinforces the idea that the logistics inside the ark were viable, not the chaotic scene that many people imagine. But the flood didn't just bring changes to the animal kingdom. It also marked a radical transformation in the human diet. According to the biblical account, before the flood, humans were vegetarian, eating fruits, vegetables, and seeds. However, after the flood, God explicitly permitted the consumption of meat. This shift introduced new nutritional and cultural practices that would shape civilizations from that point on. It's interesting to note that this dietary change had a practical purpose. With crops and vegetation destroyed by the flood, animal protein became an immediate source of sustenance. Once again, we see a carefully planned strategy for survival, adapted to the conditions of a new world that was unfolding before Noah and his family. And speaking of new beginnings, this moment was also marked by a powerful symbol of divine primacy, a topic well explored right now. After so many months of confinement, enduring fear, storms, and uncertainty, the waters finally began to recede. And it was in this scenario of renewal and rebirth that God presented Noah with a symbol that still holds profound meaning today: the rainbow. More than just a natural phenomenon, this colorful image in the sky represented a divine covenant, a clear promise that the earth would never again be destroyed by a flood of that kind. Above all, it was a message of hope. The rainbow was much more than just a visual sign. It marked a spiritual transition between the past and the future, between judgment and mercy. The relationship between humanity, nature, and divinity entered a new chapter. This was not just a promise to Noah, but to all living creatures. A lasting reminder that even after destruction, there's always the possibility to rebuild, to start over, to live differently. A daily symbol that every painful cycle can lead to renewal. And what's most amazing is how this symbol continues to impact us today. Every time a rainbow appears in the sky, it's almost impossible not to pause for a moment and admire its silent beauty. Even people who aren't familiar with Noah's story feel, on some level, the spiritual weight of that image. It's as if the sky itself were whispering that the storms will pass. That pain is not the end of the story. A direct line of communication between the Creator and creation, expressed through colors breaking through the gray of the clouds. This symbolic conclusion reinforces the idea that everything about the Ark was part of a much greater plan, one that was carefully designed from start to finish. From the ancient naval engineering to the management systems for food, waste, and ventilation, everything leads to that moment of renewal and covenant. And as you've seen, each detail in this story carries profound lessons that go far beyond the construction of a boat. And if you're thinking that this is where the story ends, think again. There's still so much more to explore together. So now, after learning all these details about Noah's Ark, tell me, how many times have you stopped to really consider the depth of this project? It wasn't just a boat full of animals, it was a true masterclass in logistics, organization, resilience, and above all, faith. Every solution found within that vessel holds lessons that we can apply to our own lives today: planning, resource management, respect for timing, and hope in the face of hardship. And I'll ask you this: are you giving enough attention to the Ark projects in your own life? Sometimes we face personal floods, storms that feel like they'll never end. And it's precisely in these moments that we need to remember, just as Noah had a plan, a strategy, and a promise, we too can build our own paths with wisdom and faith. Small, conscious choices today might be what keeps your Ark afloat tomorrow. Now, I want to invite you, if this content was meaningful to you, imagine what else is still to come. The Bible is full of rich stories, full of secrets, symbolism, and practical lessons that can transform the way you see life, the world, and even yourself. So don't miss out. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and join me as we uncover other biblical stories you may have never imagined from this perspective. And remember, knowledge is like an ark when well built. It protects you from the greatest storms. See you in the next video.